Hello. I think we are live.
We
Hello,
are
hello,
indeed.
welcome. Welcome to today's live with me, Varsha, and our co-host, Evan.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you all doing?
Morning.
How are you all doing?
Yes, good morning. And wherever you're joining from, do let us know where you're joining from. Say a quick hello because today we're going to be talking about money, business, wealth, and you. And picking up a couple of topics which may or may not go down very well, shall we say. But hey, we got to talk about some topics which are a little bit difficult and a little bit out there because why not? So come join us, say a quick hello, tell us where you're joining from, and what are you specifically looking forward to here, whatever your fancy. Oh, and also please make sure that you have that cup of tea because today is live. This discussion is almost like a tea time conversation. It's like a coffee catch up. There you go. I have my tea or cup of water here with me. And why are we talking about this today? We're talking about this because after last time's 2 weeks ago, when we talked about specifically cash in your business, finances in your business, Evan said something which caught everybody's fancy and caught everyone's attention, which is financial IQ. And would you believe the amount of messages that we got to say, oh, never mind anything else, talk about this because we'd like to hear more and your variations of that. So we decided, well, why not? Clearly, you're asking for something, so we're listening. So here we are talking about money, business, wealth, and you. So thank you for joining us once again. Say hello. Tell us where you're joining from. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the Power Hour with me, Varsha, and Evan.
And me, Evan. Yeah. Like you
Hello.
said, Washa, there was the IQ and interestingly the EQ, and I think it was
Yeah,
the EQ that piqued a bit more interest. And it's like, well, what's that all about?
yeah,
And it's actually quite interesting where there's a lot of talk about attitudes and belief and those sort of things,
yeah,
and I think that's where the EQ definitely comes in, um, because look, with your cash handling and those kind of things in your business, that's the IQ, that's financial intelligence, absolutely.
mm-hmm,
A lot of that is like your basic mechanics,
mm-hmm.
particularly cash handling. And I mean, we could talk for absolute ages about cash handling and how critical that is actually in your business.
Yeah,
Well, so you actually pointed out a very interesting article just around that space where apparently in the UAE there's petty cash leakage that 50% of
yeah,
businesses actually suffer.
yeah,
And think, well, how's that even possible? Well, and if you don't have those strong cash handling sort of procedures in place, it's very easy for things just to get out of
yeah,
control very, very quickly. I
yeah,
mean, that's one of those small places where you can have cash leakage.
mm-hmm.
But all of the cash management and those sort of things that all can be taught. That's like I say, those are basic mechanics.
Yeah,
And any accountant should know how that works. I mean, that's a given. That's expected. You know.
yeah,
But where we have a very interesting sort of space is with the EQ, and it's you and money and how that sort of relates to
mm,
your business. I mean, obviously personally as well, but definitely your business.
mm.
So yeah, it's a very interesting little not even little. It's actually quite a big piece. It's a very interesting subject to be talking about.
It is a huge subject to be talking about. And just to give a snapshot of the three areas that we're going to be talking about is I'm looking at my notes because we made a lot of notes over here. So it
A
is
lot of talking over
you,
tea.
yes, it's you and money, phase one. Phase two is you and money in your business. And the third is you and wealth, be it personal
Absolutely.
wealth, wealth in business. We're going to be addressing all all these topics and everything that goes along with it. And what we would like is for you to jump in and say, hey, hang on, maybe I have a different view on things. How about this? So let's um, get to you and money.
Yeah.
because that's what led to this whole conversation happening as it is. So there are several things, particularly some of the words that came through when we were talking about this, Evan. And I'm going to just read out the words. So
Mm.
under you and money, what comes through? There are some of the mindset issues that come through, like scarcity or insecurity, or money doesn't grow on trees, or fear or FOMO. There are so many things that come through as a mindset scenario, and that these are not limited to these words. There may be several other words that come through, and for some people it might actually be money. Oh wow, I love that topic. Money is everywhere, money is abundant. So we're discussing both sides. Evan, what do you hear most when you talk to people about money,
Look,
and
I
where
think
do
that
the IQ and EQ come from? So over to you.
well, look, the IQ, as I said, is fairly sort of straightforward. It's
Yeah.
very much about the basic mechanics. Now, what we do find is there are many entrepreneurs who get stuck in operations,
Yeah.
and in a way don't want to know about the money side of things, because they
Yeah.
either outsource it, or they have a bookkeeper, accountant person do all that, and they just trust that everything's 100% over there. The challenge with that is, without financial IQ, and that's your own financial IQ, you're not asking, or you're not able to ask the right questions of the people to whom you delegate. So,
Yep.
having a cash conversation, or even going through the results with your accountant, or your bookkeeper,
Yeah.
it lends itself to almost a one-sided conversation. And look, I know from experience that there's a big difference between a management accountant and a financial accountant. And most accountants, in my opinion, are financial accountants. They're sort of backward looking, in the sense that they're looking at the results. They can tell you some stuff about sort of what happened, but they're not necessarily forward looking. And your management accountant is more of a forward looking person. What is happening? What do we need to watch out for? And really managing cash forecasting, those sort of things, in a way that they understand the business. So there's that element of the entrepreneur with that financial IQ, and being more of a management accountant, if you will, looking at the numbers, gleaning what that story is that the numbers are telling you, and being able to proactively do something about moving forward. So that's the sort of the IQ kind of space that I would like entrepreneurs to be in, and that's what I help them do.
Okay. Okay.
The EQ is actually really interesting, and again, we can talk about this for a long time. A lot of the beliefs we have come from when we grew up. Like you said, money doesn't grow on trees. If it weren't for you kids, I would be wealthy, kind of thing. I mean, I think most of us have heard things like that from our parents, and it's very interesting how they stick.
Yeah.
And like FOMO, the fear of missing out, and the sort of the scarcity of money, and the belief. One of the common ones actually is, if I make more, then somebody else has to give up or make less.
Yeah.
There's nothing further from the truth, and yet it's very interesting how it can manifest itself, or present itself, or we experience that in our businesses, in our personal lives. So that EQ is actually really, really interesting. But it's about the attitude and belief that we notice with entrepreneurs, and how they then work that in their business.
Right. And before we go on, and I'm going to come back and dig a little bit deeper into this, because a couple of days ago, maybe last week, I put up a post on LinkedIn to say, I shared somebody's post which said, if people aren't calling you crazy, then you're not doing something that is earth-shattering or groundbreaking, or you're actually not picking up a conversation that actually needs to be picked up. So somewhere along those lines. And I'm going to pick that up today, because it might actually become a controversial topic, and yet somebody's got to do it, so I'm going to do it. Before that, going back to what you were saying, Evan, earlier about the cash management in the company, and I want to touch on that, because we're going to go there as well. It is, and some of the words that we have written over here is, what happens when cash is not managed properly in a company, or your revenue and profit balance doesn't happen properly. Is a couple of words that we wrote are you growing broke slowly at first and suddenly before you even realize it. But I'll put a pin on that because we're going to go deeper into that. And before that, I'll come back to you now about money. Okay.
Hmm.
I'm going to say, I am a proponent of saying we all are very accepting today to say, oh, love yourself, love what you do, love everything around you. And yet, very, very, very few people say, get to a stage where you love money. I know not a lot of people are happy because when I talk about this, even in one to one conversation, people look at me like I'm completely out of this entire planet altogether to say, who says that? Well, I do. Because it's not wrong to love money. And a lot of ink again has been spelt about talking about, oh, it's not about money, it's what you do with money. You can frame it as you like. But to me, you got to love that, because when you love something, isn't that what you attract? So I'm going slightly off topic over here, but I don't think I'm going completely off topic.
No, not at
Which
all.
brings me, and at this stage, I also want to say to everybody who is joining us, thank you for being here, because people like you are the ones who actually take this conversation forward. So do say a hello, tell us where you're joining from, and tell us what was your instant reaction, not responsive reaction, when I said love money.
Hmm.
And I want to hear from you. Everyone, say a hello and tell us what was your instant reaction when I said this. Evan,
Hmm.
I know
Yeah.
you
Now
feel
that explosion has done its thing, I mean, I'm giggling because I know the context
yeah,
that you're sharing that, and I mean, it's actually really interesting. It's to a large degree, it's one of the things I grew up with.
yeah,
And for me, it comes out of scriptures, out of the Bible. It's in the book of Timothy.
yeah,
Um, and taken out of context, it can sound really bad.
yeah.
Um, love, no. Sorry, back a step. The common phrase that is most often bandied around is money is and most everybody out there is chiming along with me, the root of all evil.
Mm,
If you just add a little bit more of what's actually in the scriptures, the love of money is
mm,
the root of all evil. And it's not even that, really, because that whole chapter in Timothy actually talks about working with, like when you're working with in the Bible they talk about master, but basically when you're working and you're having a good attitude, and clothing and home and all those sort of things, it's very much put in context, and it's where you go off the rails, and you I suppose you lose your faith. That's where it can become a trap, and that's where it can become an evil. Right.
yeah,
So it's kind of interesting as sort of far as that goes. But I love what you're saying, what you're saying with that, because stated differently, to me, money is an energy. We are
hmm.
energy. Everything around us is energy.
So you're softening the blow a little bit.
Softening the blow a little bit, yes. The point is there's an energy, and it's what you give out and what you receive.
Yeah,
And if you put that in the context of money, it's it's actually stated most brilliantly by Ken Honda in his book Happy Money.
mm,
It's about happy money. So when you're paying your bills, you're paying with happiness, with gratitude for the services you're getting, and likewise the money you're receiving it with joy and happiness. And that's what
mm,
we really mean when we say love money. Sure, it's a means of exchange. You can go very transactional with that, but if you look at it from a
yeah,
relational standpoint, it's how you interact with the people around you. I mean,
yeah,
just for an example, we've all heard of acrimonious marriage breakups, for example, and where there's a division of property. And again, it's just a picture that we can put in people's minds. It can
hmm,
be really challenging, and
mm,
what you're giving out there can be quite awful, you know.
mm, mm.
But on the other hand, if you're doing something with joy, giving and receiving, it's a whole different ballgame.
I love that, because many people, when you, I may be generalizing over here, so people who are
Yes,
joined us,
we like that at
do
tea
jump
time.
in. Do jump in and say, well, I know that's probably not the case. Well, where I'm going with this is many people actually don't associate energy or the joy of giving and receiving money when we're talking about money in business. Because over there, it suddenly becomes a transaction.
Yeah.
Isn't that what it is? Because suddenly we go into the accounting and bookkeeping realm to say, well, that's a transaction. Money changed hand. We must tally down to the last fill. Sure. And yet, what energy are you putting in to when you pay your salaries, when you pay your suppliers, when you receive something from customers? Is there a phew, finally we got paid, or phew, we made salaries this month, or is it wow, we got paid, that's amazing, which means that's one more customer who bought from us? It just, I know I'm blending the two at this stage, mainly because many business owners really do think of money as a transaction, unit of transaction, when it comes to cash management. And again, just to snapshot what are the three areas we're touching on today is, Evan, you said this really well, about the, and I've written those in red ink. Can you say
Yep, absolutely.
what
So
the three phases
the
and
three
how
sort
you
of
see
pillars,
it?
yeah, the three pillars we're talking about is you and money, you and business,
Yeah.
you and wealth. And the sort of subtext, if you will, about those is what you may not see.
So
And
hold on.
touched
What
on
is that? What you may not see
you
is
and
what
money
you
and
and
what you
money
may
is
not
what you may not see.
what you may not see. And we also talked a little bit about love money. You know, it's your attitudes and your beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
You and business, what you need to know or do. And that's
Do
where
is the operative word over there. What you need to know and do, because over there we're talking about generating cash and
correct. So
generating
generating cash,
money.
exactly. So
Yeah.
it's the management, and it's a means to an end, and the end is the you and wealth.
Yeah.
And that's where you want to go, where you want to get to,
Yeah.
and it's definitely about building
Yeah.
wealth, and it's about accumulation.
Mm-hmm. And what's the subtext for that? I can
The,
see it's written over here.
well, it's like an end goal, so to speak.
Where you want to go is what you've
Yeah,
written.
that's what
So
I've
if
said.
I
Yes,
can recap, it is what you may not see is that space of you and money. What you need to know and do is in the space of generating cash in your business, so you and business and money. And where you want to go is where you're talking about building wealth. Let's talk a little bit about that section now, Evan.
yeah.
Building
Let's
wealth.
when you certainly when I think both of us talk to an
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneur or just people out and about, when you
Mm-hmm.
talk about wealth,
Mm-hmm.
it's very much a personal wealth space,
Yeah.
and especially with fintech and tech businesses these days, it seems
Mm-hmm.
to be build it for a couple of years, sell it for a squillion, and all sorts of things, and giddy up.
Yeah.
That this is wealth.
Yeah.
Um, there's a challenge to that, I think, but most people think about personal wealth, and
Yeah.
it's like, what's your plan, Stan? If
Yeah.
you're working, investing, doing what's your personal sort of goal, if you will, and
Mm-hmm.
what are you going to do at some point in time? So what's the end game?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of little things we can talk about in there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like, what does it allow you to do?
Yeah.
When, how, retire, whatever it is, But most
Yeah.
people, like I say, think in terms of self. But I know, over to you, Washa.
Well, I'm just going to take it a step in a slight parallel, I suppose. It's just a different direction, only because of what I do. For me, when you say build wealth, is again a conversation not many business coaches take up, or not many businesses actually actively work towards, is
Yeah.
building wealth in your business. So now I'm talking about what is in that cash generation, cash management scenario. And what is now obviously most everybody knows is that you must at least have a 6-month runway in your business to make sure that you're okay with your day-to-day operations. One less fire to fight. In building wealth in your business, I'm taking this in a different way to say it goes well beyond that. Because if you're only thinking 6 months, you are always on that 6 month treadmill. But when you are now thinking 5 years and beyond, is when you're thinking, what do I need to do to build wealth in the business? So when it's time to break through the next scaling ceiling that we hit, there is enough money in the business to reinvest and also keep growing. So organically grow self-funded business, because eventually I come and stop at the conversation where it links back to strategy. It links back to building a sustainable business. So building wealth in your business is a very important conversation for me. So build your wealth, absolutely, because isn't that why most of us do what we do? Eventually, to secure our own future. And if you're running a business, it's important to think about how do you secure the business's future. So that's where I'm talking about. Evan, does this make sense?
Well,
I
it
know
totally
we've
makes
talked
sense.
a lot about
It
this.
totally makes sense. And the bigger picture over there, by the way, in our book, we actually talked about internally generated cash being directed to the growth of the company. And
Yeah.
that's actually really important, because when you're throwing off enough cash, all things become possible. And that building of wealth and having, look, to be frank, that building of wealth then dovetails back into your overall strategy. And Washa, you're the expert on strategy. Being able to see where you want to go and to be able to fund it, without headaches and staying up at night and all sorts of things. But getting the basics right, and it's like, man, it's like an individual who might be in trouble with money. I mean, there are certain steps you need to take to get yourself back on track, and then you continue with that discipline, and you keep growing and managing and then building that wealth. And it's the same for a company. And the company, of course, doesn't have its own spokesperson.
No.
And that's where the coach is speaking for the company, asking the right questions. And the entrepreneur and the ownership are actually working for the company, as a separate entity. We're working for, that doesn't sound quite right, but what they're doing is they are in that place acting for the company and building the company itself.
Yeah. So keeping on track with building wealth. First of all, again, welcome to the Power Hour. I see that there are lots of people who have joined in. For some reason, I can't see a single comment. So either you haven't said hello or I can't see anything. So if you haven't said hello, please say a hi so we know who's joining us, and tell us what are some of the things that you're taking away from this conversation, because this is really just to give you a background. Most mornings, Evan and I have tea. And when we have tea, we talk about these things. And just the conversation flows from one topic to the other, but keeping it fairly strategic, keeping it fairly big picture, keeping it fairly non-tactical, if you will. So it's not so much about let's note down how you do things or let's note down 6 things to do, but it really is about where are we headed with this topic? Globally, what are some of the conversations coming up, and what are our thoughts on this, and what are our individual takes on this? So one of our good friends actually suggested, guys, you should just stick a mic under your noses when you have tea every morning, record it, and actually send this out as a podcast, because we talk about economics, marketing, strategy, cash, everything from a strategic perspective. Because guess what? The common thread underlying all this, whether it is business or leadership, everything is human behavior.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Human behavior is what drives most of these industries, most of these segments to where we are today. And the conversation that we have during tea time always goes back to that. How do we as humans behave? Or how do we as humans respond? And how do we show up depending on what our individual experiences are, what our individual belief systems are? So that's how the conversation goes. So we just thought, okay, so we made tons of notes when we were talking about this particular topic, and we agreed that we're going to now just take this to you, our wonderful audience. And that's how You may or may not be able to see it. They're full of scribbles because we were furiously writing. So thank you for joining us. Please say a hello and tell us what is the one thing that resonates with you when we are talking about money, business, wealth, and you now.
And I just want to say behavioral styles. I took those scribbles. I actually made a spreadsheet, as you'd expect, but even there, I've still got a whole bunch of scribbles on there because the conversation never stops, and it's just,
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, what about this? What about that?
So. No, it doesn't. So thank you for staying with us so far, and please join in the conversation. Now, I want to go back to another book that you talked about, Evan, last time, and people actually specifically asked about what was that book about? Why did you talk about it? This is Money Zen. What was that about? And hold on. Money Zen. And in this conversation, with the three areas or the three segments we are talking about, where does that fit in? So the three segments being you and money and business, and you and building wealth. Over to you.
It is much less about the financial IQ. It's partly about building wealth. In the sense that this lady, Manisha Thakur, worked in the private equity sort of space, and sort of big deals, crazy hours, crazy this, crazy that, all sorts of things. And her big aha was she was working so madly, she ended up getting quite ill, and eventually, she was forced to have some sort of a hard stop, and to reassess. And that's where the sort of the Money Zen sort of came through. And her biggest realization was there's a bunch of mindsets where one of the big ones that she talks about is, financial wealth, or sort of where you are, is a proxy, if you will, for self-worth. So financial wealth or financial worth is self-worth. And that was actually quite frightening to her, because a lot of us get so knee deep in, definitely work. And I know I was definitely guilty of that, in days gone by, where you throw yourself into work and that becomes something that, defines you as such. And if you're not careful, it can be very, very dangerous, to your mental health and all of that. In recent years, we're talking more about mental health, burnout, and all of those kind of related things. So the Money Zen was, it's kind of framed as, what is your enough? And enough is just it's a very interesting concept, where it's what does it need for you to be content? Not you compared to somebody else, it's you compared to what you could have done.
Okay. I'm hearing. Please continue. Just a different thought formed in my head.
Well, I want to hear it because I can see.
No, so it goes to just for you to expand a little bit on what is your enough. On one hand, we are talking about, isn't money abundant? Isn't today's conversation about building wealth? Isn't today's conversation about building wealth in your business or in for yourself? So can you expand a little bit on what is enough?
There's that expression, people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but highly underestimate what they can achieve in 10. It's kind of like that, where with money, there's a lot hinges on the beliefs that you're bringing into that conversation, and enough can mean many things. Like if you have all of the pieces of your life where you're really happy, it doesn't have to be high end, you're not struggling, those kind of things. What does that enough actually look like to you? It's not about scrimping. It's not about, living not so much in scarcity, but living in, frugality that's ridiculous. There's a place where, it's the happy medium, if you will. And most of us underestimate.
Thank you for getting that, because
Go on.
Yeah. Thank you for talking about this, because that's where I was going with, to say, is it really about finding the balance? And that can finding the balance between how much do you give of yourself to. So now we're talking about two different elements over here, and meaning two different scenarios. Somebody in that very high performance, peak performance driven corporate career, and again, high performance driven entrepreneurship.
Yep.
They both, I'd like to think, they both actually work in slightly different way. They are both doing what they do best, but possibly a slightly different mindset. Again, I'd like to hear from you who joined us to say, what is your thinking as a career executive or an entrepreneur when you say, I'm giving this my all? You're not doing it only for money, though, are you? Because I go back to you and money conversation.
No, you did right. I mean, the motivations are, generally speaking, best served when they start from the internal space. Happiness is an inside job, so that motivation is sort of the bigger picture for you. It's not about external validation, and that's where that money zen was talking about, the external validation of, I've done well.
Yeah.
I've got a fancy pants corporate title. I've got this. I've got that. And from the entrepreneur's perspective, it's not about title, and it's not about I don't know, those sort of things, but it's very much about, like, how am I looking after my family? And it's interesting.
Evan, I'm going to take you over to the middle phase, which is actually generating cash.
Yeah.
And you started this conversation right there by talking about how much money is leaking out of many businesses. So, yes, we read the article, and it is true for most true SME segment businesses. I'm having a separate conversation on LinkedIn about separating micro businesses to SME and really owning the space for SME businesses, which is the lifeblood of any economy. I'll get to that separately on LinkedIn. My point over here is, can you talk a little bit about that leakage of cash in business? And from your experience, what do you see mostly happening in businesses out there with cash management? I'm not talking about big reports. I'm not talking about your P&Ls. I'm not talking about how do you read reports, not the financial side of things. I'm talking about pure cash management.
That's actually a great question. And I'm going to frame it from basically a personal perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Who here has ever subscribed to something for, I don't know, $10 or less per month?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Totally.
Yeah. So the issue with that is, because it's below your pain threshold, if you will, you don't notice it. So we were talking about petty cash before.
Yeah.
If you're not watching, and maybe not so much controlling, but definitely administering and managing all of the aspects of your business closely,
Yeah.
there is a space for leakage. Now, that doesn't mean theft.
Yeah.
How many of us have?
No, let's not even go down that road.
No, and
We're
I just want
purely
to clarify
talking about,
that.
yeah.
I just want to clarify that. So it's not about that. It could be, but it's not about that. So how many of us have got a paid app on the phone kind of thing?
Yeah.
I mean, that just goes without saying. You don't notice it.
Sure.
And, they add up.
Sure.
They absolutely add up. And it's the same when you're looking at and reviewing your performance on a month-by-month basis. Ideally you have a budget, you're comparing, and you're seeing but knowing what's actually happening in the business, and knowing very much in detail what's happening in the operation.
Yeah.
So that's where that little trap is.
Yeah. And I hear you, and I want to at some point get on a LinkedIn Live, a conversation like this, purely talking about cash management. Purely talking about cash management, because while the world is moving towards electronic payment, while the world is moving towards digital payments, pay online, pay in advance, there are still, and those are a lot of the businesses that we work with, Evan, where cash still plays a role. And these are big businesses. Cash still plays a role. And how does cash change hands? How many levels does the cash change hands before it actually not so much gets recorded, but gets tracked, I suppose. But that's something that I actually want to talk a lot about. And within that, we will talk about the cash entire conversion cycle and different elements of that. I know we have talked about this a couple of years ago, but I think it's time to restart that conversation, because stemming from a proper cash management, you naturally get to that 6 month runway. That's what you're working towards. You're back on the treadmill. At the same time, when manage that really well and then put together with you and money space, getting to that healthy scenario leads to building wealth, whether it is personal wealth or wealth in your business. And just there's a comment that's showed up. Sagrika says passion also plays a great role with entrepreneurs. Yeah, totally does.
Totally.
And I want to take it. I've not been a corporate career executive ever, so I don't know. But I'd like to think passion is a human emotion, human, what do you call it, attribute. That's what we do. So I'm not taking that away from people in corporate careers, because they're there because that's where their passion lies.
Yeah.
So, and it's in many cases it is that word passion that we somewhere think, well, I must give it my all, otherwise maybe it's not passion that I'm putting into my business. So it just we
Look,
look at internet
that's
and
like
we
that
see,
that ikigai thing, right? So
yeah,
do what you love, get paid for it, and it's finding that focus space where you're really enjoying what you're doing.
yeah,
But I just want to come back to point when you're talking about cash and cash management. You were talking about specifically physical cash.
yes,
In this day and age, so many people run around with their cards are on their phones, on their smartwatches, credit cards, whatever. Most of the transactions these days actually are not physical cash. So physical
yeah,
cash, you absolutely need to track and manage that properly. But also, I mean, money in and of itself, it's really become more of an idea than anything else. And billions and trillions
ooh,
go through electronically all the time.
love that, talk about that, yeah,
So, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't real,
yeah,
if that sort of makes sense.
yeah,
So managing your money includes the electronic space. And that's why I say if you've got something on your, like subscriptions on your phone, or I don't know, things you subscribe to, for your business, if it's small
yeah,
enough and you're not using it, that's a leakage.
got it,
So it's not necessarily just petty cash. It can be any number of things. And
got
if you're
it,
not using it, it just goes out every month. And because it's not such a high amount, you don't think it matters. But you do that 20, 30, 40 times, it then becomes quite a big sort of space. And then it's like you're wondering, well, it's like, who stole my cheese? It's all, where'd all my money go?
And that brings me back to what we talked about earlier, is growing broke slowly at first, and slowly at first, and then quite suddenly before you know it. And
Yeah, that was actually a quote from Ernest Hemingway. It was one of his characters. So how did you go broke, I think is, or how did you go bankrupt?
yeah,
Slowly at first, and then suddenly. And I imagine that character is not the only person,
no,
who's experienced
no,
that. That's for sure.
no, particularly when people go past that startup phase and think, right now we're growing, let's stretch our legs a little bit,
Yeah.
is when that 6 month runway or that wealth in business forms a greater part of the conversation, must form a greater part of the conversation, because when you hit that first ceiling is that biggest risk of crash and burn, because there's not enough fuel to to carry you through that burst of energy that is required when you break through that scaling ceiling. Again, these are conversations that we have with the clients that we work with, and successful fueling your business is really building wealth in your business. So why are we talking about all this? Not so much a rhetorical question. I'll actually answer this because it is.
Yes, please.
We're, aside from the fact that you, our wonderful audience, actually asked for Evan to talk about financial IQ and EQ. So I want to go back to that. But why are we talking about this? Because three things over the course of the years that Evan and I have been working with the true SME segment, really over $3 million and above. So one of the aspects that clearly comes through, and again, we'd love to hear from you to say, what are your thoughts on this? The three key areas in your business that came through shining are the three key areas that make or break your business: strategy, cash to support the strategy, enough cash to support the big strategy or the big hags that you've set for your company, and you and your attitude, your preparedness, your mindset. Mindset is such an overused word. It could really mean anything from, oh, I love today, or, oh my God, what's happening? So I'm going to use the word mindset with a pinch of salt. So it's you, I want to say, your preparedness, your balance, and you knowing that as an entrepreneur, yes, you are there, sleeves rolled up, doing what needs to be done on your day-to-day firefighting operational level. What is also required from you is to be able to maybe build that muscle and start thinking strategy, start thinking big picture, start thinking strategy as a thinking element as opposed to a strategy. And strategy basically means how do we do things? It doesn't. And also start thinking of cash with that big picture element. Think creatively. So it gives you that option of looking up sometimes and say, well, hopefully most times, to say, right, hold on, while we're fighting a fire today, where are we headed with all this? So that's why we thought this is a great topic to pick up, because this is what happened when we received all those comments from, or rather direct messages from our audience. We said, well, Evan, what are some of the elements that we're talking about over here? And that's led to this tea time conversation where we talk about the three different areas with you and money, which is what you may not see, which is present, which is your behavior style, your attitude towards money, your belief system that you bring into the business, because there is no such thing as you separated from business. There is no such thing as you leaving yourself at home and then going to work as a different person. Whether you consciously think you're doing that or not, at a subconscious level, you are taking yourself in your entirety to work. I'll let that absorb just for a couple of seconds, because that is absolutely true. And many of us don't realize that. Many of us do. Many of us, while we do, we don't know what to do with it. And it starts to show in your business. It starts to show in how you grow your business. It starts to show with your team. It starts to show in your leadership style. So we decided we're going to start with that. It are the things of what you may not see. And then obviously moving on to cash. How do you generate? And what you need to know and do, which is track your cash. Be a little bit more cash savvy, I suppose, finance savvy. And then think about building wealth, not just for yourself, because eventually the entire global conversation today has been for the last decade or so going towards start a business so you get financial freedom, time freedom. It's not just about you. You're starting a business not to make yourself free, but really to establish something that is going to possibly lead to freedom for a lot of people, your team for instance. Yes, that is actually a thing. And by offering the product that you do, which can sustain generations, you are in some way freeing up a lot of time or whatever resource for your clients. So building wealth in your business is something that Evan wrote, is where you want to go with this, which leads back to strategy. Anyway, I'm done with this.
No,
Is how our tea times usually go. We just go off on a tangent. But tell me, does this actually make sense?
well, I think it does. Again, maybe I've got the rest of the tea time and the second tea cup, context over here. But yeah, look, the further back you pull, to look at the big picture, like we say, your strategy and the cash to fund that strategy, but cash management as such, and what you bring to the table and the beliefs you have, and the attitude towards what you're doing, all of those are critical. When you have if anybody here has try to grow their business particularly quickly, there's a couple of pitfalls that you can fall into. One is obviously a shortage of cash, which, as we say, ties back to your strategy. Another is your business becomes more complex and probably requires more time of you, and that's where entrepreneurs can get stuck. There's a couple of other little pieces, and one of the bigger challenges is, I don't know, the leadership or management getting stuck because they're trying but they can't, they're trying but they can't, and there's that sort of that burnout kind of place. But that's where your strategy really does come into its own. So everything starts with that strategy for sure.
Totally.
And it's backed up by the cash. And once you get those two or those three sort of main elements right, things like operations, which are incredibly important, and your execution and just sort of how you're serving your customers, and how you're bringing business in. Because remember, there's two very critical things a business does. That's your pipeline of business coming in, and the serving of your customers. So your operations, your delivery. Those two are absolutely critical, and that's what your customer sees. All the other stuff we talk about, the strategy, the cash, all of those are sort of invisible to the customer, but they are absolutely critical to get right, so you can have the pipeline and you can obviously serve the customer.
Evan, as we come to this stage, I'd like you to round us up and close this conversation by talking about two specific things that you wrote under the Build Your Wealth scenario, which is there was a specific exercise and the areas of impact. So can you just briefly talk about what did you mean by that, or just talk about that?
That was more specifically from a personal wealth space.
Okay, go for it.
The idea behind that is, if you were to do a prosperity exercise, if you were to have an unexpected windfall that is very large, what would you do? Now, it's very easy to say, buy a house, I'll travel, I'll do this, and one day you're going to wake up either on a beach somewhere or somewhere out and about, and you still have a chunk of cash left. What are you going to do? What is important to you? And that then sort of also ties into the 7 areas of impact, which can also be like a future story from which you glean what your values actually are, because most of us don't really know what those are.
No.
For example, family, integrity, those kind of things are very important to most of us. And there is actually an exercise in the book, in the very, very beginning of the book, where it talks about what are the values that you have for your business. But the areas of impact that I was talking about are more personal, but it can relate to business as well. What is it that is really important to you? And you being the expert on strategy, it's like, what are you saying no to? So knowing what that is and where you really want to go is all that was essentially leaning towards.
Nice. Well, this is useful to know that And I'm also now thinking, could they be used in building wealth in your business? That prosperity exercise and the 7 areas or areas that you can impact with that wealth building. And that is a topic for another day, which we will pick up next
which
time.
we can lead into with, if there are memes out there, if you knew you couldn't fail. And most of us get stuck with, and then we get into the, how do we do that? Which must mean we must need money and blah, blah, whatever. If you knew you could not fail, regardless, just if you knew you couldn't fail, what would you put your heart and soul into? And that's
I
what,
love that.
That's what it really, that's what that really means.
Nice. Could you repeat that, just that last sentence that you said, please?
I would love to. If I could remember exactly what it is.
Fail.
If you knew you couldn't fail, what would you put your heart and soul into?
Nice. I like that. That is a brilliant closing note on today's discussion. I think where we talked about money, business, money in your business, wealth building, whether personal or wealth building in your business, and importantly, you, who plays a central role in money around you, that money that surrounds you. So, Evan, I think that's a brilliant, brilliant conversation. I see a lot of...
It's been fun.
Yes, I see a lot of direct messages coming through to me on LinkedIn. So that's very interesting. Yeah.
And it's hard to sort of keep an eye on that without, going a bit...
I know. So if you see me looking at different areas, it's because there are so many messages directly coming through. But thank you very much for being such a wonderful audience. And thank you for all the engagement. Thank you for all the messages. We will catch up and we'll respond to each one of you. Keep joining us as we continue discussions every 2 weeks on Wednesdays, same time, same place. Keep an eye out on our LinkedIn profiles. We will be sending out the event notifications as soon as we have them scheduled, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Absolutely. Second and fourth Wednesday, brought to you by Dare to Scale.
Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Have a brilliant rest of the day, rest of the afternoon, rest of the evening, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Guys, take care. Bye.